if the government can devalue the money that's in your pocket, you know, not even the money that is in your M-Pesa. Right now, the government is busy devaluing it. So which freedom is this we're looking for?
Thank you for clarifying that. And thank you for explaining the cash shortage. Okay? Hiyo kitu ya watu and people are saying there's no money in the economy. Now there's another one. People talking about, oh, there's a crisis about to happen. Please, if you have money in your bank account, go withdraw it right now, okay? That's one. It's a conversation that I've seen videos, people doing videos of that.
Do you know how much these guys are paying people, pensioners, NSSF?
Well, where has the money gone? Like, pesa imeenda wapi? Everyone is talking about there's no cash in the economy. Well, the explanation from our guest on this episode, Ed Thiong'o, will blow your mind.
The cost of running a bank, between you and I, you know it cannot be more than 2% per borrow. If they consolidate the total cost of running the bank, it cannot amount to 2% for every 1 shilling borrowed.
Then basi, a decent 3-bedroom house in Nairobi, if not for exploitation, should not cost more than 15,000 a month.
Practically, yes.
One thing about Ed Thiong'o is he can talk about the subject of money from 1,000 different angles, and you will find new and valuable information every time.
And why is the rent low and not following the market? Because the rent is obeying the rules of demand and supply. And that's why Kilimani, for example, if you find a house that is 60% occupied, that's someone who prays in the morning religiously. You know why in Kenya you cannot sustain a mortgage?
Ed Thiong'o is a business strategist.
For African countries, that is what was taught in school. The culture of saving. Spend less than you make. There's a lot of logic in that, is it? But like you said, you cannot save into richness.
That means you've set yourself up to be a slave for good.
I mean, we are all slaves. You know,
Ed Bana.
The person who is saving is not a slave. In fact, he's a worse slave because he's saving and there's not going to be any benefit.
He's a tax lawyer, and the organization he represents, KCK, supports investors in investment structuring, documentation, due diligence, and valuation of startups.
Because remember, why people stay in a bad job for a long period of time is because over time they've not created options available for them to see life differently.
Yes, true.
And therefore this person is actually banking on that this pension is going to become everything that I have and so on and so forth. And over time, they're the ones who actually lose value.
I'm your host, Dr. Kingori, and here's another reason to stay subscribed to our channel. Kama hauja subscribe, this right here is another good reason to hit subscribe and turn on the notifications bell.
But now, if you're ever in need of an office space, please Poa inaweza bring out the best in you as far as creativity is concerned, as far as productivity is concerned. Hautaki kwenda kwa hustle ya kuhire space, sijui kurent, ulipe goodwill and hizo vitu zote. You need to consider checking out Wojo. Wojo is a premium co-working space located in Upper Hill, Nairobi, Makio Hotel, formerly Crown Plaza. Wako na anything you'll ever need in an office and so much more. I'm talking about a gym. Hautawai worry about parking, swimming pool, bottomless coffee, beautifully furnished spaces including private offices and meeting room. Wi-Fi is super fast and the list is endless. You can get in touch with the team at Wojo kutumia hizi contact details tumewekea hapa kwa screen.
I kept this specifically for you, and I think I'm looking at it from a philosophical point. A month ago, I visited a Kayad. They're selling a Range Rover Sport, 4.4 million. Very tempted. It drives very nicely, okay? Then I asked the best price they can give, 4.4 million, okay? No, I'm not a fan of the Range Rover. That specific Range Rover Sport. On advice of a mechanic, not reliable option. So I ignore it. After a month, I visit the same yard. So the guy, Alex, ananiambia, oh, by the way, this range, you can get it imeshuka. Ulisema hii utaki? You can get it for 3.8. And I was like, wait. It's not a month. And the price has gone down by almost 700K. Okay? 1 month. So I was like, oh, by not buying that Range Rover a month ago, I have saved 700,000. Is that a right way to think in terms of perceived value?
Well, I mean, if you've not spent the 700K, then you've not saved anything. You see, if he had told you the Range Rover, by the price of a Range Rover at 3.8 is actually too suspicious. So if you were to buy, say, a Range Rover Sports, depending on the year, for example, and you go to a different yard and they say, the cost of this car is 10 million or 15 million, but for us, we're selling it at 3.8 million. It is often a fallacy to say you've actually saved yourself 8 million.
Why?
The last time I was here, you remember we said, I said that pricing is actually the biggest illusion of a market. Because a thing sells for a certain price because it's not worth that price.
I remember.
Otherwise, if that car is really, really worth 3.8 million, then they will not sell it at 3.8 million. Otherwise, they're not be in business, is it? But see, perceived value is that if you have a market value of the same price of the same car, say 10 million, and you buy it at 3 million, then how you consider whether you've saved is actually a question of utility. So for example, if you buy it at 2.8 or 3.8 million, and yet at the market price is 10 million, whereas on face value, the price differentiation is there and you can actually see you've saved a lot of money, it is a utility that eventually will determine whether you've actually saved the money or not. So if this car takes you to the garage more frequently, it means the utility on this vehicle versus the utility on the vehicle you bought at 10 million, then that's where you start seeing the big differences, is it? But could be, if you get the same utility out of the same vehicle, then you can say long term, there was actually a financial benefit. So sometimes when you follow pricing and say, I have bought it this because I'm saving X amount of money, sometimes it's usually a very, for lack of a better word, shallow way of looking at pricing. Because things will cost differently based on utility, is it? So and that's why, for example, when you go and you're trying to buy two phones and both of them say are iPhones, same model, but one is costing 2,000 bob, the other is costing 70,000 bob. What is the first thing you'll do? Will you say, let me buy these one so I can save 68,000? Often we go back to utility, is it? Why are you selling it that low? Why is it outside market price? Because at the end of the day, whether we save money on a product or not is a question of utility. And actually not just utility, functional utility, how much value can derive from it.
Okay.
You understand?
Yes.
So in marketplaces, utility of products will change. So assuming in the same car yard, you had gone to buy this car at 3.8 million, 4 million, the 4 million, 4 point, you say 4.4 the first time. Then when you leave the yard, the next day the government announces it is buying all Range Rovers and car yards. What would happen then when you go back the next day? The price goes up, is it?
Yes, yes.
But has the utility changed?
No.
No, it's still going to give you the same mileage, is it?
Yes.
It's only that now the market sentiments have actually changed pricing, and therefore this person is saying that this car, whereas it is worth 4.4, it is now of greater value because of the forces of demand. There is more demand for it and so forth. And therefore, when you go to marketplaces, sometimes they say pricing is the biggest illusion of the market, and therefore you want to base all your decisions based on utility. And there is no standard utility for products. If you buy that Range Rover and you want to use it for driving from work to your office, someone else wants to buy it so that they can off-road with it.
True.
Is it?
True.
Someone else wants to buy it just to show off. And therefore, it is the utility of the product to the buyer that will determine pricing. And actually, that negotiation is based on that, actually.
Okay, okay.
Negotiation is actually based on utility. Someone will say, I want to buy it at 1.2 million. The buyer will say, why? Because that person is saying, I don't see it being of utility to the extent of 2.2 million, for example. And sometimes, if the pricing of the product is actually lower than what he'd actually mentioned, sometimes they'll actually match your price because they actually know, still selling it at 1.2 million, they've still made some money. And therefore, the net sum of all these things is that pricing is actually one of the things that is improperly taught in school. You know, when our teachers teach commerce and they insist on pricing, it is improperly taught. And And as such, when we go to buy products in any market, financial markets, local markets, pricing is a factor of utility. So for someone who's buying this car to sell, the utility is different, is it? Because they know that they can actually get an extra coin from it, and therefore they might not be extremely aggressive in terms of pricing because they know I'll dispose it tomorrow.
Okay.
But who's buying it to keep it for 10 years, then how it functions, is the engine sound, is the paperwork right? You'll care about those things, and therefore those factors are factors of utility.
Okay.
And therefore there is no discussing price without utility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this to say I'm still financially immature? Because you've described my mom somewhere like, oh, it's 4.4 million. Someone will come and offer 1.2. I struggle with when someone gives me a price, I feel guilty to go too low. Like I feel like I'm disrespecting the other person. But looking at how my mom would approach a conversation like this, 4.4 million, she would offer 800. Na macho ngumu, like 800. And then I've seen her bargain or negotiate something mpaka unahurumia the person, okay? But the person is still willing to talk. But kama me, when someone gives me an offer and my budget ilikuwa kidogo, ambianga tu, oh, I'm bad for business, maybe not. Am I still financially mature if I feel guilty for offering my price?
I mean, really, you're really financially mature, because marketplaces are about value finding, is it?
Yes.
They're about value finding. I've told you, the reason why the car is selling for 4.4, it is because it's not worth 4.4. Your responsibility is to value find with the seller. And value finding is actually negotiating until you find the best price, where this person feels they've actually made some money out of the car, even if that is not the actual value of the car, meaning they are lowballing you, but you equally feel the utility of the car is near the price this person has mentioned. And traditionally, people knew how to bargain. And that's in the older generations, pride aside, they will not negotiate for ego.
But the game has changed.
No, it hasn't changed.
Come on, there's a strategy that has expired. I tried it, it's not working. You give your offer, ati, mi niko na 1.2 million. Ati hiyo haiwezi. And then you pretend you're going for them to call you. And they don't call you.
See, the rules of how markets find price will never change. So assuming in the case of saying you want to walk away, you see, you're walking away because you're walking away without a conviction. Because your utility for that product, you're walking away for pretense. Walking away for pretense doesn't mean you've negotiated. When you walk away, you're walking away because if you look at the utility of that asset,
yes,
to you personally, it's not worth whatever they're asking for. And you walk away out of principle, is it? And not all transactions you'll actually end up buying. In some transactions, you're convinced the price of this phone cannot be more than 50K. And that's the budget I have. Because I've measured and seen the utility of alternative products of the same type. I'll get that much. I'm not buying this phone for showing off. I'm buying it for the utility. Does it work? Does it, the battery life, those things, for example. Then someone will not sell to you sentimental valuation that you see now, buy, you're going to be cool. This one everybody is buying. But how does that have to do with me as an individual who's buying?
Yes.
And therefore, utility-based pricing is actually what drives market finding. And by the way, there's a whole philosophy around pricing called information asymmetry. And that's why information asymmetry means that whoever is selling a product has more information about the product than you do.
Yes.
So the person selling to you a Range Rover at 4 million, for example, whereas everyone else in the yard is selling it at 8 million for 6 million, has more information about the product than you do, is it? And mainly that information is going to affect the utility of that product. Therefore, when you go to market find, you're trying to push this person so that you get as much information as possible, so that the information asymmetry, the gap is not that much.
Okay.
And by the way, when information asymmetry is so much, that's when someone says he's been conned. And that conmanship is actually someone knowing so much than you that they lead you to believe they're right and you're wrong.
So so information asymmetry, that gap is a polite word.
Absolutely.
Of being conned.
Absolutely. If you have unregulated information asymmetry, even in legal terms,
yes,
many times,
yes,
it leads to crime. In fact, by the way, it leads to a crime called obtaining by false pretenses.
Yes, yes.
So if
yes,
I come and tell you I'm going to pray for you and you get well, so I am the one who knows whether I can pray for you to get well, is it?
Yes.
If I'm leveraging that you're unwell and you'll do anything to get healed, if I tell you pay me 10 million for a blessing, if you paid me that 10 million and I pray for you and you don't get healed, then because of that leveraged information asymmetry, many times it is dealt or considered a false pretense. And therefore, all markets are driven. All markets, whether in the local marketplace, whether in the financial markets, it is market making that drives value finding by reducing the gap between information. And by the way, intermediary institutions like banks, that is their responsibility in the market.
Okay.
To bridge the gap of information asymmetry.
Wadau, quick one before tuendelee na conversation. You're outside the country. You're looking for a super fast and safe way you can send money back to Kenya. You're looking to send as much as possible. You want to send more and spend less, like killing two birds with one stone. Then you need to look no further than TapTapSend. So TapTapSend is a money remittance application with multiple payment options. You can send money directly to bank accounts. You can send money directly to M-Pesa or any other mobile transfer platform. I know you have so many questions. You can get all your questions answered and all the information you need kwa website ya TapTapSend, which we have included in the description ya hii video. Also remember, TapTapSend has zero transaction fees and great exchange rates. Na hiyo imaanishi ati kuna hidden costs. No hidden costs. The amount of money you see on the app is the exact amount of money that the recipient will get. And here's more good vibes from TapTapSend. All first-time users will get a $30 cashback if you use our promo code Wicked Edition.
I think you have helped me reset something that can be called foolishness in how I transact. Sometimes I buy things, alafu najiambia, I wouldn't tell my mom what this cost. Kumbe, I should actually think like my mom in terms of obtaining value for something, to some extent. And still on that cost, I speak to a doctor friend of mine who has housing, okay? And it's in a name the most expensive neighborhood in Nairobi. You have it in mind. She pays 12,000 shillings a month for a 3-bedroom unit. And I've been thinking about that, and I think it hit me that, come to think of it, if that is possible, then it means then every other person in Nairobi or in Kenya should be able to afford a house, decent housing, for below that amount of money, and not to mean that the landlord has suffered, right? So is that a right way to think when complaining about overpricing of real estate in Kenya?
All right. So in the event of say where the buyer is deriving a bigger benefit than the actual utility of the product. For example, if it's in the best of the best estates in Nairobi, of course, you're going to get a house, a 3-bed of 12K. Is an exceptional case, is it? It's so exceptional that someone would wonder how.
I don't look at it as exceptional. I look at it as possible. So what they did to ensure that someone can get a 3-bedroom house in 2024 in a prime location in Nairobi for 12K, it means it can be replicated in any part of this country.
But it's also a consideration of the buyer. You know, I told you everything is a factor of the information that the buyer has. Let's take an example of someone who is 70 years old. You live in one of those estates. Your kids have transitioned, they are in the States or they're abroad, and you're struggling with the problem of you being alone in a large compound. When you go to market and you're pricing your house, you're not pricing it based on market sentiments, is it?
Oh,
your utility for putting it on the market is different, is it? You're actually trying to get someone responsible enough to live in the same compound with you to assist you because you're old, for example. And you'll find, therefore, sometimes in markets, there'll be those rare instances where a product is priced below its utility. So in the case of that house, for example, it's a house that is priced below its utility. We know that.
Let me give additional information. It's government housing.
So if it's government housing, for example, now it takes us to a different whole conversation, is it? Because again, government housing now takes us to the whole idea of real estate pricing and sentimental valuation, which we'll go to. And if that's the question you're asking, then certainly there is a bigger conversation around that, especially in Nairobi. So when we start pricing products, buildings, real estate, you want to price the cost of your car and so on and so forth, many times we are going to be driven by utility. How much value can I get from this house? But unfortunately, for real estate, it's become driven by sentiments. Now, sentiments are the largest form of information asymmetry. They create an unleveraged, it becomes hard for anyone to leverage it correctly. Because, for example, if you ask yourself why a house in a place, say Kilimani, for example, a 2-bed would cost you 80,000. If you work backwards and ask, what is the utility to a family of a 2-bed house? Is the value you get from that 2-bed house worth 80K? If you're to do the actual math and you calculate a 2-bed house is perhaps maximum going to be 1,500 square feet, and you calculate against 80,000, you'll actually find you're actually paying way more than 100 shillings plus per square feet. Perhaps even higher than a commercial building. And remember, the commercial building, for a fact, has higher utility than residential, because the commercial building is going to convert into revenue, and that revenue will convert into other things. But a house you pay for residential purposes is actually sunk cost. You cannot recover it further. Once you've paid, you're paying for non-commercial purposes. So if you look at why you're paying more than 100 shillings for that house, and yet you could actually pay the same for a commercial house, then tells you that the pricing from where the market is to get it to where you're paying at is actually based on what you call sentimental valuation. And sentimental valuation is actually going to kill the real estate space in Kenya. And sentimental valuation is, there's a bypass passing here, the government has announced XYZ is going to happen here, this is a posh neighborhood, it is 5 meters away from such and such British curriculum school. All those things do not increase the utility, but they create a sentimental value of that house. Unfortunately, when you do valuation for purposes of mortgages and all, many times the forced value actually attempts to discount sentiments. And if many banks are holding titles that were based on sentimental valuation, even the forced valuation makes it very hard for you to get the correct value. Because you'll say that a building is worth 200 million, and of course you and I know that the valuation, 60 or 40% of it is sentimental. No value is going to come and say we are going to discount from that to 40%, because then the owners would actually say this actually show devaluation work, is it? Because the market is where the market is.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, if the whole market is has sentimental valuation, there's so much you can discount. And that's why even right now, the real estate market and the mortgages we have are still bloated because of that kind of pricing.
Okay.
So in the case of the house that is being 12K and is being charged by government, essentially then it would mean if the government has calculated utility of this property as is, without sentimental valuation, that is the actual cost of the utility you get from that property.
Yes.
And essentially meaning then, it's maybe not a proper benchmark for where the market should be, because many times the government is not in it for profit. Many times the government is providing housing as a social responsibility it has constitutionally, and perhaps they will not price what the market would be. But it kind of tells you, if you can get it at this price, then the utility of that product is near or about there, but not to the extent that you'll move from 12K for the same house and someone else pays 200K for the same house. That is such a huge gap, and you need to find where the value is.
I agree, and I've been following, but I still maintain that even the margins for profits should not be, I dare say, then basi a decent 3-bedroom house in Nairobi, if not for exploitation, should not cost more than 15,000 a month.
Practically, yes. But you see, we cannot run away from what I've said about market making and how value is found. Value in markets is found based on demand and supply, is it? So sentiments drive demand.
Okay.
So if you go to Kilimani, for example, they're not charging their houses at that amount because they simply feel they can. They're actually doing that because there's demand for the houses, because of sentiments. But you see what has been happening is that as people start moving away and trying to establish estates in far-off places where they can actually now have new considerations. Here we are near fresh air. Here the air is clean. There are no high-rises here. Then, of course, now new estates emerge in different places. And therefore, if the demand reduces from Kilimani to these other places, then, of course, we expect that the pricing is going to come down. But given we should use the market, the forces of demand and supply to determine pricing. And developers have no significant control over pricing of houses. In fact, it's the market that determines. Especially for real estate, by the way, it is predominantly the market. But unfortunately, what has driven this crazy valuation is actually financial institutions. Because the financial institutions are going to lend money at those crazy valuations, then equally, the expectation of how much they should get back is equally high, is it? So then you find that the pricing is dictated by financial obligations that this person has on a credit contract.
There's a narrative, and I don't know how this affects the cost of real estate in Kenya. I spoke to Dr. Washira, who's in another coming episode. He's a former World Bank employee and also a friend of the show, just like yourself. And I picked something along the lines, Zam, before 2012, the cost of land and property was fairly affordable, fairly. Then some strange money gets into the market. Strange money. In that, there are people who are so liquid that they can outbid anyone who was looking. Let's say, for example, you're looking to sell a piece of land for, let's say, for example, $1 million, Bob. Okay? Then someone comes and offers 20 million because their sentimental value needs that location. Okay? That changes the value of all the property around that place. That changes the game for the person who raises money small, the small amounts of money to access the game of real estate. So I think this strange money, we did not establish where this money was coming from, but this strange money and a whole bunch of people who are so liquid, when they came into the market, laws of demand and supply, so anyone who had a piece of property, I think the idea changes on who you want to sell to. Do you want to sell to the person who has nanganad and saved, say, 1.2 million, or you wait for the person? An example would be like when the county governments came, people had very many holes to loot, okay? So there was money in the market, people who had access to illicit money. That's just an example, okay? Would you say that this is, do you think that theory would make sense in terms of how the value shifted that fast?
Definitely. I mean, post 2010, we saw a lot of illicit flows coming into in established economies like Kenya. In East Africa, actually, a lot of that happened. And of course, given that our neighbors are also then, some of them still are, unstable states, then there was a lot of illegal businesses happening across. And you realize that Kenya had emerged as the most stable financial sector, and therefore it was easy for you to have a semblance of stable investments. But then again, in 2010, we got a new constitution, which created a lot of liberations for property rights and so on and so forth. And that reduced the grip that the government had over the management of land. And remember, land is a finite resource. It's a finite resource. And therefore, just like any other natural resource the country has, land is one of those that we do not have. We can never have
more of
growth of. So what happened around that time is that, so to give you context, if you look at the previous legislation for land, so land in Kenya was very, very complex. So land was regulated by more than 5-6 different regimes. There was land that was regulated by acts, an act called the Register Titles Act. I don't know if you made those title deeds, they were very big. It looked like a Manila.
No.
So what would happen under that regime, if you're transferring land, they used to put a stamp and sign transfer to Kingori. So that big Manila paper was actually the title. And there was no other register in there. They would keep a register of who has been transferred, but that document was actually, you'd actually pass it to the next person.
The same document.
The same document, so it would pass down across. So there was property that was registered under what you call the Indian Transfer of Properties Act. So there were many regimes. So post 2010, so into 2012, we began harmonizing land, and through that process, some semblance of control was lost. So the first thing that you had in the older regime, there was what you call the Land Control Board. And the Land Control Board was a board set up under the Land Control Act, to regulate subdivision and sale of property. In fact, you would not sell agricultural land, still now that there's that requirement, without going to them for them to approve. And they would have a semblance of management in terms of what transactions make sense, which ones don't make sense. Land within CBD was all under short leases, maximum 99 years. And therefore, because the government had the right of reversion, for example, or controlled reversion, then it was not very lucrative for you to buy land at absurd pricing. And people would be a bit more careful because the government had a lot of control. But post 2012, and now we have all these land rights, and you have the right of reversion is a right that you cannot be denied. So people were at liberty to price properties the way they should. And essentially,
the way they want or the way they should?
The way they want, not the way they should, the way they want. And essentially that, of course, like any other market, when there's high demand for any particular property, prices go up.
Okay.
And that's why now, all of a sudden, we start seeing mushrooming, high pricing on high rises coming up, and so on and so forth. And that created now this wave that I'm saying is a wave now that has also caught up with financial institutions. Because remember, financial institutions ought not to follow market sentiments. They should try get the best value. Because remember, collateral is not based on sentimental.
Yes.
And therefore, value finding for a financial institution should be based on the marginal value of that property, what they can actually recover on a forced sale. So they followed that wave. And of course, that meant that the pricing was also not being influenced by financial institutions, because I know definitely if I go to a bank, the bank is going to give me X amount for construction and so forth, and they'll take that property, use it as security, give me whatever amount I want to construct. So that thinking is what has actually driven these property prices to places where right now, even the banks themselves are finding it to be unsustainable, because they're actually now recovering property, but nobody can actually buy it.
Okay.
And lastly, and what happened around that time is that the revision of the foreclosure rules. Foreclosure rules means if the bank recovers your property. Previously, the bank had no obligation to sell at market price. Understand? So previously, if the bank recovered your property for 5 million and you've paid your loan up to 2 million, the bank would actually sell that property for 3 million. So essentially, what that would do is that auction prices would actually bring pricing back to bring them down, is it?
Sijashika kitu hapo kidogo. If you bought a property on a loan of 5 million, you've paid, you have a balance of 2 million, right? The bank cannot sell it for less than 2 million.
So the bank then, previously before the amendments of under the Land Act,
Yes.
the bank could actually sell to recover what you owe them.
And
that's why
the 2 million, they will sell a 5 million property for 2 million.
And that's why when you go to auction prices, they used to be very low.
So now that was reviewed. So if they sell it for 3 million, are they giving you the margin?
So they return the margin to the owner. And that is what has created this backlog now of foreclosure. Because the bank is still mandated to go and sell it at the first value. And I've told you the first value is often even more higher than the market price, or near the market price, because of sentiments. The actual utility of that property, if you are to remove all these other things, is maybe 10 million, 5 million, is it? But because of sentimental valuation, when your valuer went to value for the bank, they came and said this property at first value, first sale, will sell at 7 million. But is it still above 2 million than the utility value of the actual use of the property? So when the bank now recovers your property and is trying to sell at that value, then they are not being able to attract proper owners or proper buyers. So that factor removed the ability of market prices coming down, and therefore they've been on an upward trajectory.
Yeah.
Where you foreclose, but you still sell at 7 million. I mean, the next buyer buys at 7 million. If they want to dispose, they must sell it more than 7 million for them to make a profit, is it?
Yes.
And therefore, that valuation keeps moving up and up and up and up and up and up. So I'd agree with him. Yes, these new inflows created that, but equally, it is the timing. Okay. When this legislation changes were happening, then these inflows created that upward spiral that we're seeing right now.
Okay.
And we've been unable to bring the properties down.
Okay.
And therefore, I think we are sitting at another crisis that when it comes out, it's going to come out with financial institutions.
I would be very interested to see your predictions on what it looks like if this comes down. Let me just note this up, see, so that I don't forget. But in terms of buying for utility, if you are to get into the mind of someone who wants to buy, like let's say I have an offer to buy an eighth, a 50 by 100 on a prime location for 4 million, all right? For 4 million. But then this 4 million, I have an offer elsewhere that I can get 10 acres of land. Okay? So if I can get 10 acres of land elsewhere, we were debating with my friend. There is nowhere in this country you can go wrong with 10 acres compared to just a fraction for the same price. Do you measure utility in the value you can extract from an eighth in a prime location or the future value of 10 acres of land?
If you are to apply logic and remove sentiments from this equation, you said that you call it prime is where the mistake begins. You call it prime. When you call it prime, you've already attached a sentimental value to that place. And the extra amount of money you're paying, if you have 10 acres, and an acre has 8 eighths, so 10 acres, you actually have how many eighths? 80. So you want to trade 1/8 and leave out 88 of them. 89 of them actually.
79.
79 of them. The difference is driven by that word you said, prime. Because prime is just sentimental. What makes it prime? So assuming you bought that 10 acres and you're going and your neighbor is going to be a former president, does the 10 acre become more prime? Sentiments, is it?
Yes.
You just say, I have bought land next to the president. Sentiments. And you see, pricing in markets is driven by sentiments. But when we have a collective sentiment of words like prime, ideal, posh, you know, those words that are used to drive market sentiments, then we end up paying more than we should for properties. I won't surprise you, by the way. Do you actually know that there are more homeowners in rural areas than in urban areas? It's the same reasoning, is it? The same reasoning. If you have people in rural areas do not have sentimental attachment to things. They do not price things based on sentiments. They're going to price specifically based on utility, is it? I need 5 acres. I want to keep cows. How much is an acre? And they'll ask. An acre here goes for this amount of money.
Okay.
If you say that there is a river passing by, the river is no sentimental valuation. The river is a factor of you enjoying that land because it's going to be utilized to irrigate your property and so on and so forth, is it? If they say it's rocky, that's not sentimental. It is actually based on utility. You cannot farm on a rocky place. But in urban centers, because of perceived value, there's a lot of sentimental valuation. And that's why, for example, all of us will end up not owning property. And if we own property in urban areas, you want to own in the best of the best of the best places. But truthfully, if you were to remove that heart of, I need to belong to a certain place, I am so and so, I need to be in a certain place, then actually your money can actually give you better value.
Wow.
Yeah. So the use of words that drive sentiments is actually what causes.
Once you understand the game of managing perception, you'll get more value from money.
For sure. You need to buy for you. I mean, you need to buy for you, is it? So look at in the 70s, not even 70s, as early as even 80s, even right now, some parts of Runda, are still coffee estates, is it? So 2 decades ago, the whole of that were coffee estates, is it?
Yes.
So, but whoever made the decision to say, for me, I want to go and live in that place, wasn't based on sentiments, is it? They just felt they wanted to live in a certain place and they chose to live there, is it?
Yes.
Look at what's happening in Kiambu County. People are leaving from wherever they thought was posh to come and start afresh in a place that they think in their minds is ideal for them. And essentially that is what happens when people start using logic to make financial decisions as opposed to sentiments.
Okay.
So, and sentimental valuation actually is the poverty of the middleman.
Middle class or
Middle class.
Okay.
Is the poverty of the middle class.
Okay. We did another mathematics, just Kenyaji math. Mortgage in Kenya is impractical. And again, this we also did with Dr. Washira. If you buy a house in the US, for example, the rent you actually stand to pay, as in if I buy an apartment in the US, the rent someone will pay me to live in my house can cover the mortgage and leave me something small.
True.
In Kenya, you'll go back into your pocket to top up the amount of money you need to pay the bank. Right? How do we reset from that? And please break down for us like your predictions of how you see the real estate in Kenya looking like in terms of a bust or the possibility of a reset.
So the only way to reset real estate in Kenya is to tax land. In all jurisdictions where mortgages thrive, land is a serious tax liability. The more you own, the higher the taxes you pay.
The more you own.
The more land you own, based on the value you've given it, the higher the taxes you pay. And actually these taxes are paid in the form of rates. In Nairobi, for example, our rates until recently, we were paying maximum rates of 12K, meaning it's 1,000 per year, per month. So that jurisdictions, for example, land tax is, especially in urban areas, is hefty. And what that has done, it has kept the pricing of land reasonable. You see, if you're going to buy a nave for 5 million, if you're told that if you price it at 5 million, for every year you have it, you're going to pay X percent on it, for example, if it's unutilized, then essentially speculation becomes extremely hard, is it? And if there are few people speculating, then the prices will fall because the demand isn't high. But so what's happening in Kenya, you'll buy land, and most people have land in those places that used to be so. People used to buy land, your Kajiados, your Isinya, I don't know where, that you have never set foot in. But realistically, if there was a cost to you holding that parcel of land, you'd let it go. Because the return on it isn't worthwhile, is it? If I'm going to pay 15% of the total value of the property that I declared on the sale every year until the day I develop it, then essentially, every year I'm holding it, I'm losing money. So you'll not speculate. If there's no speculation, then there's low demand for land. And if that happens, then the pricing of land becomes based on utility and to a place where it makes sense. You know why in Kenya you cannot sustain a mortgage? Is because first, the valuation of the property itself. Let's take an apartment. If you want to buy a 2-bed apartment through bank financing, on average, anywhere in Upton Nairobi will cost you, give or take, 15 to 25 million.
That's very true.
So if you're going to spend 15 to 25 million, what is the basis of that 15 to 25 million? Where is the developer getting the cost of 15 to 25 million? So you must do your math back from how the land was acquired, is it? The cost of construction, and so on and so forth. But you'll find that the biggest driver for that pricing was the cost that this land was acquired for. Now you remember that this developer has been financed by a bank, is it? The bank has given them a certain amount of money based on the pricing of the property and the forecast of the returns they'll get from it.
Yes.
And therefore, by the time you come in to ask for a mortgage, the pricing on the house, on a sale price, is way higher than the rent. And why is the rent low and not following the market? Because the rent is obeying the rules of demand and supply. And that's where Kilimani, for example, if you find a house that is 60% occupied, that's someone who prays in the morning religiously. you'll have a lot of empty spaces because
Yeah.
rent is going to follow the forces of demand and supply. The more apartments there are in Nairobi, the more options you and I have, the less likely we are going to crowd in a certain house.
True.
Because we have options. So the landlords will have to compete for a smaller market of tenants, and therefore the prices come down. So of course, if you buy the land at that valuation, which is driven by the bank, 25 million, and your mortgage is say for 48 months. In 48 months, for example, on average, you're supposed to be paying, give or take, maybe, if I'm not wrong, over 500K.
100%, yes.
You're going to pay 500K for a 2-bed in Kilimani. Who is going to pay you rent of 500K? No one. And that's why you'll find that the mortgage space in Kenya has actually been shrinking day by day, day by day. In fact, those who can access mortgages in Kenya, I think we are under 0.5%. And equally, another big driver is the lack of employment, of course, because mortgages also will only work if you can price employment long term.
Understood.
Yeah, and that's why it's really hard. And I've seen people trying to do that. It's monkey business. You won't get anywhere with it. You can take a mortgage to rent so that you can. In fact, by the way, the guy who's going to come and take it and use it as an Airbnb makes more money than you who owns the house.
Who owns the house?
Yeah. Because the Airbnb model, again, is not following sentimental valuation. It's following market forces of demand and supply, is it?
Yeah.
If I want an Airbnb, I look at the most available based on the utility I'm looking for, is it? And therefore, you'll find that those guys will actually make money out of the real estate more than the actual owner. Because the actual owner has been boxed into a model that is driven by poor financial economics.
Now, 0.5% is probably the projection of people who can probably get access to a mortgage. That brings me to a question I've been struggling with from when we last spoke. There's a lot of fallacy in the financial system and the idea of money in itself. Like, who has access to money, okay? If you follow the principle, we did math here with Stormzy Mwendwa of someone who earns 100K, okay, a month. There are possibilities of becoming a millionaire in 30 years. Oh Lord, it's almost impractical in Kenya because you have needs and stuff. And that's 100,000. And then you find that the statistics say that not even 500,000 Kenyans, and that's actually blowing the numbers, 500,000 Kenyans have access to that kind of money every month. And I'm assuming we are counting mpaka businesses. We are counting mpaka businesses, okay? So the question now becomes, and I think someone enlightened me tukiongea juzi, they were like, I asked them, who has this money? They said, we have civil servants, we have certain business people, we have the expatriates, and it was just a handful of careers and sectors where people make this money. The rest are just survivors. Am I right to say that because after this, I'm going to a demonstration of why I think you can't borrow to invest in Kenya and why loans somehow are a scam at the end of the day, okay? So is it right to say that our financial system in itself is a fallacy if you follow the rules by the book?
So what you're speaking about, so there are two things. In when you're trying to describe economies of different countries, there's what you call citizen productivity. Okay. So citizen productivity is a theory that says if Thiong'o works hard and stops being lazy, he'll be able to access more revenue.
Okay.
Essentially meaning that if he's able to get a little money and save, then tomorrow work hard to get a little money and save again, eventually he's going to drive himself out of poverty.
Yes.
And unfortunately, for African countries, that is what was taught in school. The culture of saving. Spend less than you make. There's a lot of logic in that, is it? But like you said, you cannot save into richness.
That is confirmed.
Forget
you
it.
cannot.
There is no way, practical or otherwise,
Yes.
you can save to secure your future, not to be rich. Because the way the economy is set up, it is set up to accelerate that theory of citizen productivity to make you more productive now. Because in economies, we do not care about how much money you make. In fact, that is not even a factor of when you calculate, when you discuss economies. Anyone who discusses economies in terms of how much money is in circulation, that is very little knowledge and it's dangerous. Economies are calculated on the basis of access to credit.
This credit that I'm telling you is a scam.
True, it is, and we'll discuss why it has become a scam. But economies are measured on the basis of access to credit. There is no government that wants you to work hard to make a lot of money and save. The government is going to make money or succeed if you have access to credit. Because what credit does, it allows citizen productivity to be accelerated by you bringing some of the prospects of your hard work from the future into the present, is it?
Okay.
So for example, everybody wants to acquire things they cannot afford.
True.
That is, everybody's ambition is to get what they don't have. Nobody is happy to keep earning what they have, is it?
Yes.
So if you have a certain type of car, your ambition is to get the next one.
Yes, yes.
And therefore, access to credit allows you to access that future and bring it forward. And by doing that, it is that action of bringing that future, to bring the future now, whether it's to accelerate it or to bring it back, whatever that word is, it is that act that creates employment, improves GDP, is one that improves circulation of money, and so on and so forth. So in essence, when we want to discuss whether you are able to succeed in any economy, forget about just Africa, in any economy, it is the availability of credit that is going to drive you to succeed. And therefore, our teaching that credit is bad, loans are bad, is such a fallacious teaching. It has kept a lot of us grounded. Things we should be working towards, and actually, one of the things that the government could be getting right is that they should be working to create a credit scoring system that you carry from when you leave campus to the day you get employed. Because essentially, it is how able you are to bring that future forward that is a measure of economic growth in GDP.
Okay.
In the calculation of GDP in the formula, have you ever seen where we're asking money in circulation? No.
We are going to get to that because people are saying there's no cash in the economy.
There is no access to credit in the economy. There is cash in the economy. Where has the money gone to? Unless someone has taken some of our money and burnt it.
Money is there.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. But
So essentially what I'm trying to say is that it is impossible to save yourself, to save money to a point where you become wealthy. Because remember, the one thing that everybody has is finite time. Understand? It's finite time because finite time makes it structures the way your maximum effort. If you have 12 hours, you have 12 hours. What you can actually do is to improve the quality of the 12 hours, is it? Yes. If you are being paid 1,000 bob per hour, you strive to change that 1,000 bob to 2,000 bob, is it? But we realize to improve these 1,000 to 2,000 is going to cost you, is it?
Yes, yes.
So you find that we have gotten to a place where you're continuously in a trap of self-improvement. People go back for master's courses. People take additional courses. Those courses are actually taking money from their savings, is it?
Yes.
To do an MBA in Kenya, for example, in a private university is going to cost you give or take $1 million, is it? $1 million which you have saved over many years. But surely, there is no guarantee if you now get these masters, automatically you move from 1,000 to 2,000 bob, is it?
Yes.
And essentially, that's why it's difficult for anyone to say they're actually working towards saving and for saving to become rich. If we were to borrow all Western economies, a lot of discussions are driven by access to credit. Access to credit buys you a phone, buys you a house, buys you a car, buys you your mortgage, buys you all these things. You only have one responsibility: to continuously make sure that you're meeting your current obligations as you unlock future obligations. And that is how
But
markets
that
work.
means you've set yourself up to be a slave for good.
I mean, we are all slaves. You know,
The
the person who is saving is not a slave. In fact, he's a worse slave because he's saving and there's not going to be any benefit.
No, wait. As in, maybe I live in my idea of freedom is a utopia where I now subscribe to, let's say, for example, I need to be $500,000, I'm a million bob liquids, so I can handle the nini and I can save for future gigs, okay? I'm a future responsibilities. Let's say here's a strategy for planning. You know, let's say you want 3 kids, and these 3 kids unataka they live a certain type of lifestyles. You start saving for them before they are born and invest, say, in compounding. Okay, you're not borrowing, you're investing in away from your savings. Okay, and you plan the lifestyle you want. From, let's say, for example, give yourself 20 years by the time they get to university, and you save consistently, and you get an investment vehicle that will give you the amount of money you need 20 years from now. You live comfortably now. You don't have to borrow from anyone, right? That means you can live outside the credit system, right?
How can you? If the government can devalue the money that's in your pocket, not even the money that is in your M-Pesa. Right now, the government is busy devaluing it. So which freedom is this we are looking for? You remember that because money is driven by non-economical factors. For example, how does the war in Ukraine move your shilling from 10 shillings to now 6 shillings? You've not caused the war.
But okay, I understand. But don't you think it's the same mathematics? You go borrow, like you have access to credit. Kenya now, it's between actually 14 and 22%, okay? Let's say wakugonge, assuming you're borrowing at let's say base, you're 14%, okay? It means in my $1 million bob, I have already devalued my money by 140,000 by just borrowing. So if I have $1 million bob and I want to do something with it, right? And I have the option to borrow. Why would I lose 140,000 in the name of interest? Yet, if I know the calculations of value, milking value, okay, I can milk the value from my $1 million shillings, okay, instead of going to borrow.
So truthfully, when you've borrowed money and it's sitting in your account and it's devalued, you do realize you've actually not devalued your own money. That is not money you had. It's money you've taken from your future, is it?
Yes.
Is it?
But you will pay for it.
For sure, you'll pay for it. But the reality, it's actually a better store of value than money that you've actually worked for and saved.
So what?
And there's a reason why. When we define wealth, it is ordinarily many times tied to entrepreneurship. Because you see, the concept of money is a factor of risk management. And that's what we're discussing right now. That you could actually borrow, then the money is put to risk. You could actually save, and still the same money is put into risk, is it? We've actually seen situations where you actually save in a pension fund, then the pension fund goes under. The same children you are saving for are actually left destitute, is it? So it's a factor of managing risk. So to go back to the question you asked is that whether you can actually save into richness, which is what you're trying to address.
Make a lot of money so that you don't have to borrow.
In your model, making a lot of money so you don't have to borrow is a factor of predicting how the future looks like, is it?
Yes.
Is it?
Technically,
because as you save with your pension fund, with your money market fund, and they're telling you will give you a return of X amount, will pay school fees for this much, you're just assuming that in years to come, inflation will remain where it is. The money you're going to get after 10 years is actually going to be equivalent to what they're telling you right now.
Okay.
So someone who actually started paying for these things, education trusts, for example, in the 80s or 90s, when they're being paid right now, for example, a good example is NSSF. Do you know how much these guys are paying people, pensioners, NSSF, who started saving in the 80s? They're perhaps giving you per month 40K or 50K. 40K or 50K, 10 years ago was a lot of money, is it? But it's not right now, is it?
No, it's not.
Would you say that it would have been prudent for that person to get money from the future and apply to the rate right now and invest? Because at least he knows right now the value of that 10 million actually I can predict and work with it right now. The challenge with saving in a system like ours is that the longer it takes, the time value for money many times is going to affect how much you get in return.
We have investment vehicles. We've discussed them on this show. Like, okay, let's say you go out of the Kenyan system. You have access to, say, the S&P 500, the companies that since 1900 have had a predictable rate of return. You invest your money there. Your money, okay? Your money. Like you come up with ideas that can add you more revenue, and then you invest outside to companies that have had a reputation of giving returns, legitimate returns, not the risks that we have around the country. Does that solve the question of inflation?
Well, it does. It does. But you see now you've adding a new dynamic. You're now investing in another country, for example, is it? So you're also assuming that the inflation rate, for example, the FX changes, for example, are not going to affect you. The challenge with savings is that saving is very hopeful. And that's why entrepreneurs don't save. Because saving is putting a lot of hope in broken systems. Well, I'm not saying people should not save. I also save, and I'm saying I save, but I'm not saving so that one day I'm going to go to the bank and cash out my money and say now I am free. Because I know for a fact saving is going to give us a safety net, but saving isn't going to solve growth challenges that we're facing in an economy like ours. So you see, so long as you
saving should be limited.
Yes.
It should be limited to a safety net.
Absolutely. We should save for safety. We should not save for success. Because you see, our economy, if you're not, and we discussed the cycle of capitalism, is it? And how poverty traps happen.
Yes.
If you're not participating in the continuous growth of the economy, meaning that for every one shilling you make, someone is losing, then essentially, there are very high chances that over years to come, you'll find yourself outside. And sometimes savings can actually do that to you. In fact, it can actually become a bigger slave. Because remember, why people stay in a bad job for a long period of time is because over time they've not created options available for them to see life differently.
Yes, true.
And therefore, this person is actually banking on that this pension is going to become everything that I have and so on and so forth. And over time, they're the ones who actually lose value. When the economy crumbles, it is not those who have credit that suffer. Because you know something about credit? All the money you take from the bank is insured. And in your loan, you're actually contributing a percentage of it to pay premiums for insurance, is it?
Yes.
So the bank has already insured against non-performance, is it? Essentially meaning that in the worst case scenario, they would actually come and tell you restructure your loan.
Okay.
But for your savings, once it's devalued, it is devalued. You can go back and say, now help us to restructure our savings. You understand?
Yes.
And the saving culture has driven commercial banks to where they are. Because commercial banks will encourage you to save. So that the money you save, they come and lend to me. And I take that money and risk it. Then eventually I'll employ your children. How fair is it that I used your money to build an enterprise for children you are saving for to come and be employed?
Which country are you talking about building an enterprise in a country? Before we even go there, you are saying that you can explain to us how the credit system has become a scam. Okay? Because, for example, I believe when it comes to return on investment, it's a very debatable subject. I think I've been accused of having a fixed mindset, but from where I come from, two things. There's something we've been discussing and we'll touch on that. If you bought Bitcoin in 2016, it was 60K. Today, one Bitcoin, I checked last, it was something over 12M when it hit 100K for one Bitcoin, right? So, wow. So if you had invested in that 60K, you would be a solid millionaire in Kenya shillings today, okay? That's one, okay? But in reality, that's very volatile. But in reality, over the course of history, the return on investment on average, whether you get high seasons and low seasons, averages at 10%, right? So, Then you want to borrow to invest. say you go to a bank, watakupatia 15%, 20%, right? Over a period of time, and this changes because sometimes we'll go to 18, sometimes we'll go to 22, right? But your return on investment plays around the same percentage, 10%, right? Isn't this a scam from the onset?
Definitely, especially if you look at what's happening or has happened in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, especially in our country. And I'll take you back and tell you why. It is not the circulation of money that is a challenge. It is access to credit. So let's take the example of you who is working to save, is it? So you guys want to assume that your employer prints money, is it? The employer who's employing these guys on a pensionable job is actually going to the same banks for him to create economic value, is it?
Yes.
He takes a loan from the bank to finance his business, to be able to afford the hours you're giving him. In return, he gives you enough money for you to pay your rent, run your bills, and have a little to put in a pension fund, is it? So, if the credit space in any country shrinks, that employer has to make a decision, and a tough one, is it? To let you go, to save his business. And therefore, when companies start shrinking their expenditure, generally everything else in that economy starts shrinking. If you used to do shopping worth 5,000 bob, you stop doing shopping worth 5,000 bob. And therefore, it is tracking credit. If you were to look at the success of any government, by the way, in terms of people being happy with the government, many times we'll complain its circulation is poor, but look at what's happening in the credit space. Give an example right now. When the government is aggressively borrowing domestically, meaning that for every small need the government is coming to commercial banks to borrow. I was actually looking at the records of a report on domestic lending, customer lending versus government papers that banks hold. You'll be very, very surprised. A lot of banks are giving more than 65% of their core capital to government. So that does is that when you go to that bank to borrow, the bank manager is making the simple calculations. The government is borrowing at what percent right now, T-bill rates? Is it 16 or 17%?
Last I checked, it was 17.
That's 17%. The commercial rates are at 23%, is it? 5% difference, is it? So the bank is going to ask, will I risk this to get an extra 5% for this guy who's going to default than get 70% that I'm very sure I'll get paid back?
Yeah.
Of course, the decision to give the government is a no-brainer. And what that does is that anytime you walk into the bank and you leave without money, then you have to make tough financial decisions as an entrepreneur, is it? If I'm not able to get access to buy supplies for raw materials, for example, then I have to cut down on my production. As I do that, I'm letting go of people who are actually contributing to the economy through pay-as-you-earn. They are the ones who are buying from supermarkets and so on and so forth. So in economic terms, it is usually not fair to just calculate how we are faring by how much money is in your pocket. You remember that the money has actually moved to someone else's pocket. The money is still there. If there are 1,000 notes in Kenya, we still have 1,000 notes in Kenya. But access to you being able to bring your future forward has been curtailed. And that is why in most countries, credit scoring is such an important topic that they dwell and spend a lot of time on credit scoring because we understand the impact it can have. What we've done in our country is that now the government has stopped caring about credit scoring, access to credit and those kind of things. And you've seen what's happening. Just look at the news in the last year only. How many companies are downsizing?
Very many.
What do you think is happening to all those guys who are saving? And that's the challenge with saving. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Because the challenge with saving is that you're risking it all with the hope that one day I'll go and cash out.
So you only save for emergencies, for example, right? So to design a lifestyle, you need to look at where you play. So, let's say, for example, you have a lifestyle of, say, 200K a month, okay? If you can have, like, let's say 2.5 million saved, that means you can cover your expenses for a year that means you're solid on that. So sasa now you go back to living a risky lifestyle of risking and getting more stuff.
Which is what we call investing.
Which is what is called investing. Okay? So here you borrow and put money in different places, but just in case something happens, you have bought yourself enough time to recover and do something else.
Absolutely. And that's why any person you've called on the issue will tell you that when you start structuring investments, you want to classify them into three: safe, moderate, risky.
Okay.
It's a game of managing risk. People who savings are not investments. I hope you understand that.
Savings are not investments.
Oh. Even if you put your money in a bank and they give it as an FD, and they give you 2 or 3%, so long as they're giving you lower than the treasury bill return rate, there's nothing you've invested. It's actually lower than, it's actually more reasonable to buy a 20-year bond.
Okay.
Is it? For you to earn that extra. So when you put money in an FD, it is, you've given money for safekeeping to your bank. But you said the bank is going to lock it somewhere in a vault, waiting for the day to come and pick it. Before you even leave the bank, someone else like Eddie has it in his account. And the bank is telling me, you risk it.
So, thank you, because my mind is opening up in a different direction. So, can we define financial freedom as you having a kitty to cover you for emergencies over a period of time based on the lifestyle you live? Let's say, for example, 6 months, 3 months, 1 year, right? Saved somewhere that probably in a vehicle that protects you from inflation, all right? Then with what you're remaining with, now you can design what you, as in you forget about this totally, this just in case. Then now you come back to, let's say, compounding. Who gives you a better deal in compounding? So you set aside something for that. Let's say that's safe investment, common T-bills. Now you put money in that, but now with long-term targets. That's financial freedom.
Absolutely. It's actually a combination of those big elements people learn in high school. One, saving. For short-term to medium-term saving, which means you're covering yourself in case of economic shocks, but not too much for you to tie down capital. Secondly, is the ability for you to be able to participate in investments that give you return, short-term or long-term, is it?
Okay.
And the measurement for me, I've been saying, I usually say the measurement should be matching the government T-bill return rate or near equal to the government T-bill return rate. And then lastly, it is your ability to access credit if need be. If you combine those three, you'll never, okay, the word financial freedom is what's the right word? Financial freedom is the word you keep using, is very utopic. There's nothing like financial freedom because the world is what it is. You could be financially free today, then the
Tomorrow
next day you're
change.
Unwell. You have to spend all your money in the hospital. So there's nothing as saying that I am financially free. So long as in a capitalistic world, you remember for every shilling you make, someone must lose it.
Okay.
So long as you're in that cycle, you'll never be free. You just need to make sure you're not the one who's losing more than you're making. And that's essentially, it's just a continuous journey of mastering lifestyle and being able to safeguard your life along the way. And we do that until the day we die anyway.
Thank you for clarifying that, and thank you for explaining the cash shortage. Okay, hiyo kitu ya watu and people are saying there's no money in the economy. Now there's another one. People talking about, oh, there's a crisis about to happen. Please, if you have money in your bank account, go withdraw it right now. Okay, that's one. It's a conversation that I've seen videos, people doing videos of that, and then there's another thing that's not helping, and I think misinformation also makes the situation worse. Yeah, 24 banks are about to close down, and I asked someone about that, like what that was about. Akaniambia, choose carefully the bank you bank with. Are these just what do we call it, alarm calls just to make people panic, or the financial system is so stable that such things cannot cause a shake? And what happens in the event, for example, people panic and start withdrawing money from banks if this was to be actualized?
Right. there are two things that perhaps what's currently the threat, and for me, I explain it from a more technical point of view. So it's not that banks are not able to meet their financial obligations. No, banks are able to do that. It's only that there is a rule that requires all banks not to lend more than 25% of their core capital to a single borrower. So the only exception to that rule is that banks can lend more than 25% of their core capital to a publicly listed company. So there's a lot of wisdom in that. If money is lent to a publicly listed company, there is an assumption that that money is shareholder owned, meaning it is owned by the members of the public, and therefore it is indirectly distributable to the members of the public. But then secondly, the extra injection of working capital in these public companies increases the share price, and everybody benefits, and so on and so forth. However, that rule does not anticipate the government being defined as a public company. And the threat we have right now is when banks have exceeded this single obligor rule and given more than 25% of their core capital to government, then that is likely to create significant economic challenges if the government is not able to repay. So the government runs a cyclic bond system. So the government is borrowing today to pay those who are due yesterday. Borrowing today to pay those who are due yesterday. That's what the government is doing. And it's not just our government. Globally, that is how bonds work. The government keeps a revolving door of domestic debt. But the challenge with that, if the government aggressively keeps doing that, and Kenya has actually really increased the potency of doing that, is that for every round the government comes to borrow, what's happening to the interest rates? They're moving up, is it?
Yes.
So what has happened is that over time, the accumulated interest rate repayments for government become to a place where they start accounting for maybe 30%, 40% of government spending, for example. If we get to such levels now, there are high chances now that the government will start prioritizing other payments before its bond interest payment, is it? So there's no way the government is going to say we are not going to provide healthcare to pay you who has some money in a T-bill or a government bond. They'll perhaps prioritize healthcare, is it? Now, the challenge has been, because it's been observed that has happened in other countries. For example, if we go back to the economy of Ghana. Ghana did the same thing. Aggressively borrowing the domestic markets, keeping it cyclic. The banks, instead of refusing to lend further to the government, because they need to do that to de-risk against government non-performance, they continuously lend to the government domestically. So when the government was told to restructure its debt, domestic debt, because when the government is unable to meet its foreign obligations, they are going to restructure their loan like any other person. But the IMF will tell them, before we restructure our loans, you go and restructure your domestic debt. Who will be the first people to be told to restructure their debt? Will be the banks, is it?
Yeah.
And that is a threat that those who've been speaking about the threat of domestic borrowing, that's what we are foreseeing. But it's not the way guys are putting it that banks will pay. So long as after every 6 months, the government is paying back what is due in interest on these bonds and bills that they are holding, the banks will remain afloat. But because you've breached the single obligor rule, now the banks will really struggle if the government slows down or is unable to pay.
Okay.
And it's not very far-fetched, because we've seen it happen to countries like Ghana and Sri Lanka. That has actually happened. So it's a genuine concern, but I wouldn't say it's one that is medium term or short term. It's long term. If this is sustained, there's a likelihood we're going to have that kind of crisis.
Whoa. Hey. Okay. Before we close, in terms of borrowing and access to credit, how low do you think the interest rates for Kenyan banks would need to go to have significant impact in the economy in terms of realistic business? So
So we first, I think, before we even get to lowering the interest rates, is to understand what is wrong with the current system. And you need to ask the question, why is the bank giving money to the government, notwithstanding this knowledge? So economic systems globally, the banks do not control interest rates. It is investment banks that control interest rates. So investment banks have a responsibility of what you call market making. They're the ones who come up with new products. They're the ones who come up with new ways of people putting money in investments. They're the ones who will design collective investment schemes.
Yes.
They're the ones who are going to consolidate corporate bonds from company 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and create a pool and tell you, if you put in money here, we are guaranteeing you X% return, guaranteed. So when they do that, they create an appetite for domestic investment, and therefore interest rates can actually be managed because now people have other options apart from giving money to the bank. If the bank is denied access to this capital that is sitting in accounts for long, then the bank doesn't have a lot of money to give to government. And therefore, we can now manage the question of interest rates.
Okay.
So because in our economy, we don't have a lot of market making happening, essentially meaning that the products we've grown up knowing are the same ones. It's actually very interesting that we grew up talking about T-bills, bonds, money market funds. We have now derivatives. We have commodities trading. But we have rates. But who is talking about the amount of drive it is to put money in rates, for example? Nobody's doing that, is it? So essentially it means that we have financial products that are not working, but we're consolidating in one place. So if we were to reverse this and investment banks were allowed to do their job, because commercial banks have really hogged this space by making it impossible for anyone to develop a product, then we can actually get to a place where we start now regulating what interest rates are. So the central bank is able to actually determine where domestic interest rates should, where bank lending rates should be. But the central bank will not do that if it is the biggest proponent of pro-government lending. So since right now the government is trying to push commercial banks to bring it down to, is it 16 or 17% from the 23?
Yes.
And the banks will do is to say, we are very committed to bring the rates down. As I'm telling you that the amount of control commercial banks have over how interest rates are managed is actually appalling for you to talk of an economy like ours that is trying to create, to improve our GDP by letting more people participate.
Okay.
So to answer your question, the cost of capital, and I like going by what circles are doing, the cost of capital, if it is not priced commercially, can actually come as low as what the circles are giving, 12% per annum.
Yes.
So even given that, you say that circles, under their constitution, circles do not profit from doing business with their members, and that's at 12%. So we don't even to aggressively charge an extra. The cost of running a bank, between you and I, you know it cannot be more than 2% per borrower. If they consolidate the total cost of running the bank, it cannot amount to 2% for every 1 shilling borrowed. It will be significantly lower, is it?
Yes.
The shareholders of publicly listed banks are still borrowers in these banks, is it? So essentially, we will get to a place where interest rates are not too aggressive. And the banks, but therefore, if you ask me, the banks are happy, would be happy to do that, so long as the banks are not looking at opportunity cost. But the government is creating this notion that you'd better give us and give Thiong'o because he's more risky. And that is what is creating this opportunity cost in terms of risk assessment.
Yes.
So I think if you are to think about it, give or take, these rates at some point have been at 14%, have been at 15%. Actually, at some point they were actually, I think, almost at 12%, 13%, is it? So it's still possible to aggressively work towards that percentage, but you must first address the issue of access to credit.
Okay.
Because banks will not get to that level
if
people are not able to borrow.
Okay.
And if the economic environment is not suitable enough for you to invest your money and pay back the bank, otherwise it will not work.
Okay. Sawa. I had hoped we close on that point, but there's something you said in passing that I wish you can clarify. I found the concept very interesting. We've always bashed Kenyans for not thinking outside the box when it comes to businesses. When you see an M-Pesa, people open M-Pesa businesses there. Thiong'o Kenyans are not creative. But you make a comment that actually is a concept and it is deliberate and that is how it's supposed to work.
Yeah. So what I told you, last mile retail businesses, there is no customer ingenuity. Because see, if you go to a place where there are 10 M-Pesa shops and you try set up, what would you say? What kind of business would you set up?
A butchery. Okay, butchery. You may find a butchery there.
Maybe a water vending machine, for example.
Mm-hmm.
See, in such kind of place, there's no room for you to market find because you already know that all the customers who come to that place come looking for M-Pesas. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
If you go to Kamakis, I give you an example of Kamakis.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody who wants to eat meat, for example, is going to drive to Kamakis, is it?
Mm-hmm.
But surely, if you're to set up a kayad in Kamakis and say, I want to differentiate myself, are you likely to succeed?
It's nothing to do with that thinking outside the box. This person is coming to eat meat. May probably.
So last mile distribution. So last mile, and as a model of businesses, so you have your from manufacturers, you have your wholesalers, you have the distributors, you have your retailers, then you have last mile retailers, and last mile retailers are the ones who are primarily customer facing. They actually follow where the market is, and this concept has existed over many years. So in a marketplace that usually sells fruits, if you've been to a market, you will find anybody who sells fruits is in one section.
Yes.
People who sell jikos are also in a different place, is it? Because at that level, the thinking is the customer who comes to buy for fruits knows this region is where fruits are, and that explains why that has happened.
Okay.
In our downstream in Kenya's economy, for example, if you go to Kirinyaga Road, it's known for
spare parts.
Spare parts.
Yes.
If you come to Crossroads, it's known for electronics. And there's a reasoning behind that, because as part of the marketing plan for last mile retail businesses, the customer is clustered. The customer goes where there are clusters because, as we began by saying, value finding. So the customer wants a place where they can get many options.
Oh.
And that is the reason why, even for you, when you want to go and buy clothes, you will drive all the way. If you want to thrift, you'll drive all the way to Toy. Why not go to the neighborhood where the guy selling second-hand clothes outside your estate? You wouldn't, because of that thinking of cluster. So there's some wisdom in it. And when I say sometimes we advise guys in terms of businesses, not everything should be done theoretically. Okay. Don't try to reinvent last mile distribution because customers are clustered. You want to set up where they are. And now compete with those guys in terms of what the customer cares for.
Okay.
And so on and so forth. Yeah.
Asante. You actually mentioned Toy Market, and I think it's proper to give a shout out to one of the gentlemen I know from Toy Market who sells the classiest sneakers in the country, high quality, and it was Vance Chuck Taylor. He sorts me very nicely when it comes to sneakers. Nikitaka kusurprise mtu, especially the people who talk about nataka vitu original na bei poa. Vance Chuck Taylor, by the Toy Market, a young man doing wonders, and I think he's one of the people who challenges my thoughts. There's still hope in business.
Absolutely. And by the way, I also want to just conclude by saying, all said and done, it is better to set up business when things are tough. In fact, right now is when anyone who wants to do business should do it right now. Business succeeds.
Where will you get credit when bankers probably are not? You said very well that hakuna, the cash is there, just that there is no access to credit. Like there's something going on in the credit system.
So what that means is that it's harder for you to access credit. But with a prudent business, you'll access credit.
With a prudent
business. Because when times are tough, people tend to make more logical and well-reasoned decisions because the risk component is higher. And especially I've seen actually some of the businesses I've seen being set up post-COVID, most of them are actually very resilient businesses because they were set up with the right fundamentals. I calculated, I know I'll take this money, this I'm going to spread it, this I'm going to risk it because I know for a fact I can't afford to fail. Okay. But when we have economic booms, people usually have crazy ideas that end up wasting a lot of money.
Me, I'm of the idea that you never know of an economic boom until it has passed. Unasikianga tu every time nakuanga hakuna pesa and then after a few years unasema time ya unyi kulikuwa na do. Now that's the time people were screaming the most. Then I think in that regard I would be inclined to go with your idea that yes, money is there, right? Just that the strategies to access money are different. But there's no time I've ever had manze kuna pesa mingi. There's a lot of money around.
It never happens. So what we're likely to see, even where we are, we're just likely to see an increase in access to credit. That is what we're likely to see. The central bank is already seeing it. And by the way, that's why they have all this push. Okay. And actually, I think also there's going to be an economic easing strategy by central bank to create access to credit and improve circulation of money within the economy. So I say, in every crisis, there's an opportunity. Every crisis is an opportunity. So instead of all of us joining the choir and saying things are not working, these are not working, this is a time to ask yourself of the things that are not working. Okay. How can we solve them? And I said, for example, so long as we can solve a problem for someone, they're willing to pay you. Okay. And you have seen a lot of businesses post-COVID actually being able to come up and do most of those things.
We thought the lack of money, the complaints about no money in the economy has something to do with high dollar rates, exchange rate. Dollar hit 160 at some point. And there's a conversation. I had people say dollar has been playing around 128, 129 for a very long time. Okay. And there was word that it's being propped. It's not realistic. Cost of commodities is going down. Bei ya unga is down. Fuel for the first time atilishuka na them a lot of money, like 15 bob or thereabout. Like fuel has not had, petrol prices have not gone up for a few months, okay? And then naysayers there's word that, but still people are complaining that there's no money. What if the dollar is being propped? What's happening there? 160 to 129?
So, of course, I think I said the last time when we were discussing the budget, is it? And I told you when the government has access to foreign borrowing, one of the immediately expected outcomes is that the shilling is going to gain because we are actually borrowing the dollar. So it is automatically expected that the shilling will gain. Because you remember when the government came in and we could not access credit, one of the things the government did was to do a round to our international debt partners to try and convince them to advance money for the government to be able to meet some of its obligations, finance its budget, and so on and so forth. So automatically, because the pricing of the dollar is a question of balance of trade, how much we are losing in effects as we are doing trade with other countries. So if you, of course, you bring in more dollars into the country, essentially means that the shilling strengthens to some extent. Yeah. And of course, the shilling strengthening automatically means that our bargaining power when it comes now to balance of trade is be a better proposition, and therefore, of course, the price of commodities would actually come down to where they are right now. But truthfully, if there hasn't been an increase in exports, then it is likely to say that the stabilization of the dollar is a bit more artificial. And you remember why it went up again? The year before it went to 160 is actually just when the president paid out the sovereign debt we had, the sovereign bond. Remember? Yes. Immediately the government went and paid, and the president was happy to announce we're not going to default. The shilling lost because a lot of currency left, a lot of dollars left for us to meet our international obligations. So that constant movement up and down for most African countries is actually being driven by debt. We should get to a place where it's driven by trade. Balance of trade. We should export more. But unfortunately, what you see the government has done, the government has not been able to address the question of creating additional export. And I see the government strategy is to perhaps export labor. I'm not sure how that is going to work. Most of the countries where we are going to send our people, we don't have double taxation agreements with. So I don't think the net effect of that is going to add anyway to the balance of trade. How many guys in Qatar have you had sending money back into Kenya?
Ngoja. Aki, Ed, shida yako ni every time you talk, tunaenda trajectory ingine. Are you saying that the people who we are talking about being exported as, okay, the structured labor export, let's call it, okay? They are going to countries where they will pay tax in those countries and they will pay tax in Kenya still?
Absolutely. Unless the Kenyan government is willing to forfeit. Give them tax holiday so that when they send money back into Kenya, it's not taxed. If I was working in Qatar and then I'm going to pay taxes in Qatar, then I'm going to send money into Kenya, I still have to pay capital gains tax for any investment I do. I still have to pay, actually by the rules actually for income tax is that if you've been in Kenya for more than 121 days or an aggregate of 184 days, you should declare your taxes here. So 120 something days is actually 4 months, is it?
Yes.
Or thereabout. So these guys are going to come back into Kenya for those 4 or 5 months. There's a high risk and these guys are going to have to declare their taxes here, is it? So using export as a means of increase, labor as a means of export is preceded by a lot of policy adjustments. I haven't had those policy adjustments. So if you want us to have a working agreement with Qatar or whatever country we're going to discuss, we begin first by discussing a structured double taxation agreement. And double taxation agreements, by the way, it's either when I pay tax in Qatar, the Qatar government gives me a credit. I come and claim it in Kenya. And then that will make sense for me to bring all my money back into Kenya. Yeah.
Ed, it's interesting that you're also a tax lawyer beyond your knowledge on investments. So I'll ask our audience directly. We'll check with your schedule again. I think we've never discussed taxation in depth with you on the show, despite this being like the 4th time you're on this platform. So ile kitu tutasema ni, please send us your questions. Any question and you might kuwa nayo tax, then we set up another conversation if your schedule allows, exclusively on taxation.
No, for sure. Happy to be of help.
Asante sana.
All right, karibu.